Hey everybody, this is the Gospel of Mark study number 14, and we will be in Mark chapter 8, verses 1 through 10 this time. So, in Mark chapter 8, Jesus is feeding another group of thousands of people. It's going to be a miracle that's very similar to the miracle that he did back in Mark chapter 6. Verses 30 through 44 when he fed 5,000 people. Now, the differences between these two miracles are number one, obviously, in one he feeds 5,000 men, and that's in the Mark 6 passage. In the Mark 8 passage, he is feeding 4,000. And keep in mind that when we say 4,000 men or 5,000 men, there's going to be more people there because they only counted men. They did not count their wives and children. So probably when he's feeding 5,000 men, he's feeding 15 to 20,000 people. In the Mark 8 passage, when he's feeding 4,000 men, he's probably feeding 10 to 15,000 people, okay? So the number of people he's feeding is different. The location is different. In Mark 6, the feeding of 5,000, he is on the Israeli side of the Sea of Galilee. In the Mark 8 passage, he is on the Gentile side of the Sea of Galilee in the region of the Decapolis, the 10 Gentile cities. The other difference then, obviously, is going to be that the Mark 6 passage, he is feeding Jewish people. In the Mark 8 passage, he is feeding Gentile people. And that is really significant, okay? Jesus actually has been, since Mark chapter 5, venturing in and out of Gentile territory, kind of going in and out, in a little bit longer, coming out, hitting different parts of the Gentile population. And the reason that he's doing that is that he's prepping his disciples for the Great Commission. Now, they, at this point in their ministries, do not have the Great Commission. They do not have the understanding that Jesus wants to save people from every people group on the earth. They think Jesus only wants to save Jewish people. And so Jesus is going to have an eye-opening announcement for them in Matthew 28 after he has risen from the dead, when he gives them what we call the Great Commission in Matthew 28, 19 through 20, when he says, "Go, therefore, and make disciples." That's the command, make disciples of all the nations. Now, nations is the word ethnos. It's where we get the word ethnicity, ethnic group. It's talking about people groups. And when we look at a people group, we're talking about people that have the same language that distinguishes them from other people, the same culture which distinguishes them from other people. And so the Great Commission is going and making disciples of every people group on the earth. Obviously, that's going to include a great many thousands and thousands of Gentiles, okay? And then he says that we're to go and we're to baptize them and teach them all that Jesus commanded. So if we're going to baptize them, that means they come to Christ, because you have conversion, then you have baptism, which is your profession of faith, and then you have teaching, in which we are learning how to live the Christian life. Now, you take any one of those three legs off the stool, and the stool is going to fall down. In other words, you're not going to have a disciple without conversion. They're not going to be a disciple without baptism, and they're not going to be a disciple without teaching. So you have to have those three legs on that three-legged stool if you're going to have discipleship, okay? If you're going to have a disciple. And so Jesus is going to give this command at the end of his ministry after he has died and risen again. But as he's prepping his disciples, he wants them to see him leading by example as he goes into Gentile territory and begins to bring Gentiles to himself. So we see him do that in a big way back in Mark chapter 5 when he takes his disciples in verse 1 into the Decapolis, the region of the Gerasenes. And they encounter a demon-possessed man who is possessed by a legion of demons, okay? And in this story, which is Mark 5, 1 through 20, Jesus not only exorcises the demons from the man, but he saves the man, brings him to himself, and this man is completely transformed. And at the end of the story, the man is asking him, "Can I go with you?" He's imploring the Lord to go with him. And Jesus says, "No. Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So Jesus sends him as the first missionary to the region of the Decapolis. Decapolis means 10 cities. And this, again, is that 10-city region on the northeast side of the Sea of Galilee, okay? And so this man then, in verse 20, the man went away. This is Mark 5:20. The man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis, those 10 cities, how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. Now, they hadn't believed, but they're amazed, okay? Now, you come to Mark 8, or actually Mark 7, verse 31, and Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre and went through Sidon down to the Sea of Galilee, and look at this, and into the region of the Decapolis. He goes back to that 10-city region that he had saved that man who was possessed by demons from, okay? And there, some people brought to him a man who was deaf and could hardly talk, and Jesus heals this man. We talked about this last week in our study, and they bring more people for him to heal, and Jesus is healing people right and left. Now we come down to chapter 8, verse 1. During those days, or during those same days, another large crowd gathered. Now, this is not the crowd that's been following Jesus around on the western side, the Jewish side of the Sea of Galilee. This is a brand new crowd, and this crowd is distinguished by the fact that it's Gentile people. This is the Gentile region on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee. So this huge crowd has gathered, and they're with Jesus, and they have had nothing to eat. They've been with him for 3 days, listening to him teach, watching him heal and exorcise demons out of people, and they have not had anything to eat, but there's something that is keeping them there, and that is Jesus, okay? Jesus is more important to them right now than food is. Jesus says, "I have compassion for these people," in verse 2. Now, obviously, he's got compassion for these people because they're hungry. He's concerned, as we're going to see later on, that they're going to collapse on the way home because they haven't had anything to eat. That's verses 2 and 3. But the big thing we need to see that he's really pointing out to his disciples is that he doesn't just have compassion for Jewish sinners. He has compassion for Gentile sinners. And aren't you and I glad that he does? Because we're Gentiles. Look again what he says in verse 2. "I have compassion for these people." In other words, I have compassion for these kinds of people. I have compassion for these types of people. I have compassion for these Gentiles, just like I have compassion for you Jews. Now, see, that was news for the disciples. That's a new way of thinking for them. That's a new paradigm for them, because they've always thought that God was against the world and only loved the Jews. They didn't have a category in their theological minds for Jesus loving Gentiles. They only thought God loved the Jews. And so this is news to them. Jesus is emphatically stating to them, "I have compassion for Gentiles." That's why I brought you across to this part of the world, so that you would see that I love them too. I desire to see them reconciled to the Father too. Well, after Jesus says that he's concerned for them, he's afraid that they're going to go home so hungry they're going to collapse on the way. And his disciples answer. Jesus doesn't even ask them a question, but they're answering what they think they need to say here. And listen to what they say. "Where in this remote region, where in this place can anyone get enough bread to feed them?" Now the emphasis is on them, the word them, okay? The idea that they have in their mind is that Jesus can do anything he wants to do. He can feed anybody he wants to do as long as they're a Jew. And he did that in Mark chapter 6. But these are Gentiles. Does Jesus really want to feed Gentiles? So they're not asking Jesus to do the same miracle that he did in Mark 6. They're thinking they've got to go out and find food because Jesus is not going to feed Gentiles. Now that's really interesting because that's exactly what Jesus wants to do. And they haven't picked up on that because they are struggling with some prejudice right here. Jesus says to them in verse 5, how many loaves do you have? And then they reply, 7. And in verse 6, Jesus told the crowd to sit down on the ground. When he had taken the 7 loaves and given thanks, he broke them and he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people, and they did so. Now it's interesting. Jesus makes his disciples distribute the food to the Gentiles. Now keep in mind, Jews did not even want to touch a Gentile, let alone serve a Gentile. Jesus is putting his disciples into a very uncomfortable place, a very unconventional place, but a place that was very necessary. He's making them serve Gentile people who they really did not believe that God cared about or would have compassion upon. So he has his disciples distribute the bread. They had a few small fish as well. Verse 7, he gave thanks for them also, told the disciples to distribute them. He makes the disciples distribute the fish too, okay? They're not getting the point, and so Jesus is going to drive this point home. The people ate and they were satisfied. Afterward, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. About 4,000 people were present, or men were present. That's going to equal out to about 10 to 12 to 15,000 people altogether. After he had sent them away, he got into the boat with his disciples and he went to the region of Dalmanutha. So, Jesus is prepping the disciples for the Great Commission, trying to get them to understand that God has compassion on Gentile sinners, just as he has compassion on Jewish sinners, and we are glad for that. And so when we come to the end of the story in Revelation chapter 5, verse 9, as John has this vision of heaven, the 24 elders there are bowing before the Lamb of God, who is Jesus. And in verse 9 they say, and they sang a new song saying, you, Jesus, you the Lamb of God, are worthy to take the scroll and open its seals, because you were slain. With your blood you purchased for God people from every tribe and language and people and nation. Nation. That's that same word in Matthew 28, 19 and 20, the Great Commission, people group, ethnos. You have made them to be a kingdom and priests to serve our God, and they will reign on the earth. Now look over at Revelation 7, verse 9. And after this, another vision he has of heaven. After this I looked, and there before me was a great multitude of people that no one could count, from every nation, ethnos, there's that word again. Go you into all the world and make disciples of every nation, every people group. After this I looked, Revelation 7:9 again, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language. Standing before the throne and before the Lamb, they were wearing white robes, were holding palm branches in their hands. They cried in a loud voice, salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. So all of these people groups of the earth, which are comprised primarily of Gentiles. Oh, there's going to be a lot of Jewish people there too. Certainly Israel, that remnant is going to be saved. But there are going to be far more Gentile people here than Jewish people, because God has mercy and compassion on Gentile sinners just as he has on Jewish sinners. And that's what Jesus is trying to get his disciples to see. And that's what he's trying to get us to see, is that Jesus has compassion for those kind of people. Maybe they're the kind of people that you and I don't like. Maybe they're the kind of people that have done us wrong. Maybe they're the kind of people that we wouldn't cross the street to talk to. Maybe we'd run. We got to remember that Jesus has compassion on those kind of people too. It's his desire to save people from every people group on the face of the earth. Now, I didn't say he's going to save everybody, because we know not everybody in the world is going to be saved. But he will save people from every people group, every ethnic group on the face of the earth. They will be there in heaven with us, rejoicing before the throne of the Lamb. Aren't we glad for that? Well, listen, that's it for today. We'll pick it up again in Mark 8, verse 14 next time. Take care. Bye.